Hi, everybody. Welcome to Crash Course for Designing for Any Virtual Classroom. Your presenter today is Mel Chambers. Mel is the host of TOC's own webinar series, as well as director of online instruction at MSC Consulting. She regularly hosts webinars for the e-learning guild's online forums, as well as e-learning industry's weekly webinars. She has over 20 years experience in creative media production, project and change management, online instructional design, and e-learning strategy development, and has been designing, producing, and coaching for synchronous online programs since 2002. She holds a master's degree in instructional design for online learning and has spearheaded award-winning programs in e-learning, process improvement, and strategic development. Ladies and gentlemen, Mel Chambers.
Thank you so much for that introduction and welcome to the crash course on virtual classroom delivery. This really is a crash course. I have a lot to cover, so buckle up and here we go. So one of my favorite statements from clients or those that are new to online delivery is, can't we just launch Zoom and put up some slides and hope for the best? And the answer is no, you really shouldn't just do that. And why is that? Well, there's quite a bit going on during an online session that makes it very different from a face to face. First and foremost, of course, is the technology or virtual classroom platform that you're going to be using. So, when I say platform during the session, I mean things like Zoom or Adobe Connect or Feedloop or WebEx. Also, what's different is how you're going to engage with your learners. So, from design and delivery perspective, how you're going to use the tools within the platform, such as breakout rooms or chat, as well as really your ability to use your voice and visuals for best practices in engagement. And we're going to be talking about all of that in this session. And when you don't take the time to properly plan and prepare, it can be the difference between having what feels like a train wreck versus what feels more like smooth sailing. So, in this session, this is really a primer to help you be a more confident sailor. So, we're going to be looking at three important areas: design, logistics, and delivery. So, when you have a good instructional design, that will really help promote engagement. If you have poorly handled logistics, that will make your engagement difficult or impossible. And if you have a well prepared, well supported presenter, they can focus on delivery and effectively engage with their learners. So, let's start with design. One of the biggest pitfalls that I see when adapting for online delivery is thinking that it's a one for one. Meaning, if you did it one way in the face to face, you can simply or easily do it the same in the virtual classroom. And although you can do a lot of the same types of activities like discussions or small group work, how you will need to administer these will be quite different, as there are many considerations. So let's just look at one example. Small group discussions. Now, these are common activity in most learnings. And here's a simple one here on the screen. This is for face to face. You're gonna discuss the pros and cons of adapting for a virtual classroom. Take about 5 minutes to discuss at your table. If you like, you can use a flip chart to record and then be prepared to debrief. Not a lot of instruction. It's a type of activity that we've been doing since childhood. We know almost immediately what we need to do, and it's a very simple activity. Didn't take much prep work. Maybe total 10 minutes we'll end up working on this activity. Now, what you see here is the same type of activity, a small group discussion, but in this case, we haven't to provide a lot more instructions. So here you see the visual on the screen. Now, while this visual would be showing, as the instructor, I would also be verbally giving instructions. We have to be very explicit to not only tell them what the activity itself is going to be. In this case, they're going to go into their breakout activity, they're going to have a discussion about a topic, they're going to use a notepad that's in their breakout room and designate a scribe, and they be prepared. So not only do I have to give the instruction on this is the goal of the activity, but also be really specific of what to expect when they go into the virtual breakout. And this takes time. This is a great example of how this is not the same as face to face. So if you compare this to the example just before this, right, same similar activity, uh, there's a lot of things to consider, and these are them. So, setup time. And this particular example, I did this one in Adobe Connect. Adobe Connect is a platform that is persistent, meaning I can set up the room days in advance, weeks in advance if I want, leave the room, and everything is as I left it. And that includes breakout rooms. So, in this case, it took me some time to set up the breakout rooms. I had 4 or 5 different rooms. I went in, I put notepads, I put whatever instructions that they needed in the breakout rooms so they were there and ready to go when they went. So setup time, but also setup time within the session itself. So I had to give a lot of instruction that took up time. I had to make sure that everybody was assigned to their groups and let them know what groups they were in. So this then equates to actual time. So this activity, which might have only taken about maybe 10 minutes in a face-to-face total, now likely will take anywhere between 20 and 25 minutes. I've doubled my time to do almost the exact same activity because of setup, because of actual time, because of the logistics. So in this case, I asked them to do a notepad. Well, how am I going to get the notepad back into the main room? And then, of course, just the total time of this. So there's a lot of considerations. Again, it's not a one for one. So how do you design interactions for your chosen virtual classroom platform? Well, you have to know your tools. These platforms, meaning like Adobe and Zoom and Teams and whatever you're using, these platforms are not created equal. And although they all have a lot of the same features or tools, as I like to call them, they don't all function the same way. So most of them have polls and application sharing and whiteboards and annotations and chat, and some have breakout rooms and you can send files different ways. And that's all great, but you really have to understand how they behave. And I will often ask in my live sessions, what is your go to tool? And most will say, well, polls and chat. And I'll ask, well, why? And they'll say, well, because it's easy. But who is it easy for exactly? The facilitator, the participant? Is it really really that easy? And in some cases, yes, it is. But just because you do a poll, does that really make it engaging? So there are a lot of tools at your disposal with the platforms, but you need to really understand their capability in order to make sure that you're designing an engaging experience. I often like to say it's not about the tool, it's about the instructional design, except when it's about the tool. So these next couple slides I'm going to show you, they're going to be part of your handouts. We're not going to do a deep dive. This table will be in your handout, but what is in this 2-page table are the list of all the common tools that you'll find across the platforms. Everything from chat to whiteboards and annotation and polls and application sharing. You'll pretty much find that in any collaboration tool or collaboration platform. Also being able to play audio, video, your status indicators, and breakout rooms. And in this table, not only is there a list, but there's a description of the tool if you're not real familiar with it, what you might use it for, an example activity, but the most important thing is this last column of considerations. So again, these platforms are not created equal, but also with considerations. Let's look at a couple of examples here. So I've pulled two out, chat and whiteboard. These are both very common tools that we use. Chat is pretty easy. Chat is pretty intuitive. might not have been so intuitive 15, 20 years ago, but now most people know, type in the white rectangular area, hit enter or send. You don't have to give a lot of instructions, and typically there's little to no setup. What you might not know is that if you're using Zoom, chat doesn't automatically appear when you open up Zoom. You have to go find the chat. You have to find your Zoom system tray, click on the chat icon, open up the chat. Well, maybe that's instructions that you need to give. Also, considerations is your facilitator able to monitor it frequently? What kind of privileges are you going to give them? Are you going to allow participants to do private chat? These are all things that you'd have to set up on the back end. From a whiteboard perspective, again, whiteboards are pretty common. They're pretty easy. You use what you call your annotation tools on your whiteboards. But they're not always standard. Sometimes there's different ways to bring up whiteboards. There's different ways to bring up the annotation tools. In Zoom, it can be tricky to actually find your annotation toolbar. I often have to give really explicit instructions. It's not down in the Zoom system tray. It's up on the top so it's a very different. So it's really important that when you go to design, you know which platform you're going to design for because that could change how you design. Case in point, I design very differently for Zoom than I would do for Adobe Connect. Adobe Connect has a lot more robust capabilities. Doesn't mean I can't do a lot of the same types of activities, but how I deliver them might look a little different. So understand your platform and understand your tools. This will be critical. So remember, I said it's not just about the tool, it's about the instructional design, except when it's about the tool. So don't fall into the trap of, oh, I'll just do a poll here. You need to start with basic design principles. Start with your objective, right? What is your objective? Determine what your activity is, and then decide the tool that you're going to use. And understand it's going to be an iterative process. So, meaning maybe I go through this and I decide, okay, I'm going to do small group work and I'm going to do it in breakout rooms. But then I go back through and I go, oh gosh, I'm only doing a 90-minute session. I don't have time now for a 20-minute breakout. I really only have time for 10-minute discussion. So now what would have been maybe a breakout activity is going to be a group discussion, and you're just going to bring up a whiteboard and have people use their annotation tools because you know the considerations and how long it takes to do activities using these different tools because you understand your platform. So design and then select the tool and then iterate. So some final tool considerations: is setup needed and how much setup is needed? How much instruction is needed? So if your learners are new, or I'm sorry, if your learners maybe know Zoom and they use it a lot and they're really comfortable sharing their screen and using their annotation tools, then build really robust activities using those types of tools because you're not going to eat up time. Every time you have to give instruction is time that you eat up in your room. And time online is very different than time face to face. It goes very quickly, like warp speed. How experienced are the learners in the platform? So again, if your learners are pretty experienced, again, you can do things that are more robust. If they're brand new to the platform and you have to build in more of this instructions, or they've never done a virtual breakout room, so that first breakout room is going to have a lot of storming and norming, you need to build that in and take that under consideration. And last but not least, how experienced is your facilitator? Our poor facilitators often get overlooked because sometimes somebody else is designing the course and then handing it off to the facilitator. So if your facilitator is new to delivering online, really keep that into consideration as part of the design. Don't go wild and put in 4 breakout activities in 90 minutes because your poor facilitator is going to be really, really stressed out. And we're going to talk more about how you support your facilitator and your participants in just a little bit. I've been talking a lot at the micro level, at the session level, and to close out this design section, I want to talk at the macro level. So going back to that original statement of it's not a one-for-one. When you are designing for virtual delivery experiences, it's no longer about just showing up and teaching the content. you have to consider the bigger picture. You are now architecting an experience that begins before the learner ever logs on to the live session. You now have to consider what I call the three T's of technology, timing, and talent. So, technology, of course, is being the types of platforms or tools that you're going to use throughout the entire process, not just the live event itself, the timing of when you're communicating with everybody that's involved, and of course, the people factor, the talent, the who is doing what and when. So if we look at this at a holistic perspective, right? Again, you're building an experience, you're architecting an experience. And it's not just about the one event anymore. Remember, we're not just having them show up and sit down. There's a lot more involved. Let's say you had a full day event and you now need to adapt it for online delivery. Ideally, you're not going to ask your participants to sit all day for 6 hours or 7 hours straight, like you might have in a classroom. Ideally, if you can, uh, make it more of a blended solution. So maybe they do a little bit of pre-work before they come. Maybe they show up for a live session or a couple live sessions, and there's some work in between. So what would that look like? Well, again, coming back to the three T's. So what are you doing before the session? Right? What are you communicating to your participants and even your facilitators? What's being communicated? Things like, how do I log on? Do I need participant materials? Do I need to download something? When are you sending out this communication? Who is sending it out? Right? How are you sending it out? Is it through an email? Is it through an LMS? On the live session, how often are you having the live sessions? How long are they going to be? An hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours, 4 hours? How many are you going to have? Are you going to record the sessions? And if you record them, where are you going to post the recordings? If you're doing assessments, when are you doing the assessments? Are you doing them in the session themselves? If you are going to do them, what type of tool are you using? Are you going to use a poll that's already part of the platform itself? Are you going to use an external evaluation tool? How are you going to deliver that assessment? Who is going to deliver that assessment? A follow-up activities. What do you need the participants to do, especially if they're having in between sessions? What is it going to be, when, and who? And of course, any post course assignments. So there's a lot to think about. Probably the biggest is this area right here, the first two steps, the pre and in between, and the live sessions itself. Remembering, you're architecting an experience, not just a course. Always considering the three T's of technology, timing, and talent. Now, of course, you could have the most beautifully designed course or program. It's super engaging. You're very excited about it. But if you have poorly handled logistics, that can really make engagement difficult or impossible for the learner. I don't know how many times that we think we're all set. And the next thing I know, I'm getting emails about, I don't know where the link is. I don't know how to log in. What platform are we using? So this is really important that this is like the number one thing that gets overlooked is the logistics that are involved. Remember, can't we just? No, you can't just. Hey, you need to really think through this because otherwise they're not going to know where to log in. Maybe they get in and they'll say, I don't know what to do with my audio. Are we dialing in? Are we using computer? I can't hear, I can't see. And you haven't even begun your session and your learners are frustrated and already disengaging. And your poor facilitator is probably frustrated as well. So again, you want to look at the bigger picture here. Stand back and know that it's not just about showing up for one event. I, I usually recommend building a virtual event roadmap for your organization. And this is a great thing once you've gone through this exercise to then give your stakeholders, right? When they say, can't we just, you can give them this and say, no, we can't just. Look at all the steps that are involved in our event. And Again, this will be in your handout if you'd like to use it as a template. And this is just for one session. This is a typical roadmap that I use when I'm prepping for webinars, right? So this is just a webinar. This isn't even maybe even for a course, but it could be for a course as well. And it's really broken down into three. It starts, at the beginning there, the top left corner, and just identifying your topic, writing your discretion, your descriptions, beginning to draft your slides, creating the room itself. Whether it's persistent like Adobe Connect or not, but you still have to do scheduling, sending participants all the information that they need to know in order to be able to successfully log on and participate, and even scheduling practice sessions. That second row there is really about preparation. So I know when I'm doing production work or I'm working behind the scenes and I'm preparing even just for a webinar, I will meet with my facilitators at least once, if not 2 to 3 times, to make sure that we've set expectations and that we have tested everything. And that we have plan Bs, which we'll talk about. And then that last row here is, from rehearsing to logging on early. I usually always log in at least 30 minutes early for any event that I'm doing, because you might log on the day before and your technology is great, and you log on the day of and something's not working, and it gives you that buffer to troubleshoot. And of course, all the way to the end. So I really recommend developing some sort of virtual event roadmap. So when your stakeholders say, "Can't we just?" you can show them something like this and say, no, I want you to show all the steps that are involved. On top of that, you really also need to identify, well, remember that T, that talent, that who is doing what, and identifying what the tasks are. So the next slide's going to be a little busy, but stay with me. So there are a lot of tasks that are involved for each one of these steps. If you look at the bottom of your screen here, these are all the common, what I would say, roles that are associated with a virtual event. You've got the presenter, maybe you have a coach or a coach host, tech support, logistics, maybe a program manager, and of course, let's not forget the learner. What you see here on the screen is where each of these are associated with each part of the roadmap. Now, don't get scared if you're thinking, oh gosh, in my organization, I can't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different people. I'm lucky if I can get one person to do this. However, don't think of it as 7 people. Just think of it, these are roles and tasks. I know for me, I work for a lot of different organizations. Sometimes I'm the presenter and I'm the host because I don't have somebody supporting me. Sometimes I'm tech support and logistics and the program manager. Sometimes I'm the person coaching, the presenter. So it can be, one person doing multiple roles. The important thing is to understand what each one of these does. Right? What will your tech support do? What will they do before the session? Will they be available during the session to help the facilitators and help the learner? Logistics are probably working more up in that first row, along with the program manager. And so, again, build a roadmap, identify what roles you think are going to support your roadmap. And again, this is something that you can give to stakeholders or management when they say, "Can't we just?" Say, well, no, there's quite a bit involved. We can't just show up. So let's now talk about some technical considerations. So we talked a little bit about logistics, but technical considerations, this is big, right? Because that's what online learning is. We're using technology. So again, I have this as well as some additional insights in the handout itself in regards to technical considerations, but we'll just go over a few here. So one is presenting, right? Obviously you're online and the idea is you're presenting something. Commonly, most people are building a PowerPoint. That's what you're seeing here today. I'm in show mode here, so I've got animations playing. So in some of your platforms, you can upload your presentation. So in Adobe Connect and in WebEx, you can actually upload. And a lot of the platforms like Zoom or Teams or GoTo, you application share, which means you share your screen. That's what I'm doing here for this presentation. So you'll want to decide if you're going to upload, if you're going to application share. Now, why is this a technical consideration? Well, not everybody's comfortable. Remember, how experienced is your facilitator presenting online? Sharing your screen can be a little tricky. I myself work on multiple screens. So when I go to share my screen, I need to make sure that I'm sharing like the screen that you're seeing now versus not the screen that has all of my notes on it. But it can be tricky for me to monitor chat while I'm sharing my screen. So practice is really important. And if you're going to be sharing your screen. So that's one technical consideration. Animations. So animations, I don't mean like the little fun, like graphical, like dancy animations. I mean like builds, like I'm doing right now with my bullet points. I'm building those transitions in my PowerPoint. If you're, this is important to understand. So if you're in a platform like WebEx or Adobe Connect and you're uploading your slides, you really need to check that your builds and your animations are working because you are uploading onto a platform and it does a little conversion. So you want to test that. For a long time, WebEx was broken and builds and animation didn't work. So if I was designing in WebEx, if I had a slide like this, so in my PowerPoint, this is one slide with like 6 builds. But if I was building in WebEx, knowing I was going to upload my slides, I would have to then have 6 slides that emulated the animation build. Right? So now I've just added 6 more slides to my PowerPoint. So it's really, again, that's why it's important to know your platform and its capabilities and to test these things out. Another thing with animation, say, great, yeah, but I'm sharing my screen, Mel, so I don't really have to worry about that testing. Well, again, if your facilitator's not real comfortable or they don't have multiple screens like I do, and they're on one screen and maybe they don't want to be in full screen share because they want to see their chat, well, then their builds aren't going to work. So you need to understand, again, what's the experience of the facilitator, who is going to be facilitating, and how are they going to be facilitating? Okay. This is the biggest one that gets overlooked: the hardware, the software, and the network setup. I usually try to always recommend that people be wired, not wireless. I know that's becoming harder and harder to do. Uh, but if people are having issues suddenly and their audio goes, I say, can you go get wired? Because that's going to help with your bandwidth. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Because this is the Officers Consortium, the annual institute. I worked last year quite a bit with OPM and the government side, and firewalls was a big consideration. A lot of times, if audio wasn't working or they're having trouble logging in, I'd say, okay, well, log out or and turn off your VPN, get off VPN, and come back into the session. So really understanding what the setup is for your learners and your facilitators is going to make it easier for you to troubleshoot and understand what's going on. And firewalls and VPN, that's a big one that can really throw people, and they get frustrated because they can't get into a session. Are they coming in through a web browser? Are they coming in through an app? Are they coming in from a mobile device? That can make a difference too. If you're in a platform like Adobe Connect, being in the app is the better way. You'll have a better experience than coming in through a web browser. Usually in Zoom you have to download, but it's a little more seamless. But sometimes you might be in, in an organization where they're not allowed to download the app. So you have to give instructions on what to expect there and be prepared to troubleshoot. And then mobile devices, some people will come in on their mobile devices, but know that the mobile interfaces look drastically different than the desktop or computer interface, whether you're coming in through an app or not. They look drastically different. So when you're giving instructions like, please give me a green tick for yes, and you'll find your green tick at the top of your screen, where it looks like a person raising their hand. Well, that's not what they're going to see on their mobile device. So you need to know if people are going to be joining that way for giving instructions. I usually recommend, unless you're just coming to a webinar, I usually recommend learners not come in through a mobile device, especially if they're going to be doing breakout activities. Video. Now, when I mean video, I'm not talking webcam. That's a different beast. I'm talking about if you're going to play a video in your training. Some considerations there is bandwidth. If you know you don't have really good bandwidth, I wouldn't play a video. Now, again, just like with the presentations in some platforms, you can upload the video. So it's uploaded onto the server and playing from that platform server. Or in the case of like Teams or Zooms, you'd be sharing your screen. The video is playing on your own computer as a presenter and you're sharing your screen. It still presents some bandwidth issues, but usually plays pretty smoothly. But you want to test that out. One of the things that a lot of people get hung up on, including me, I've done it, is in Zoom when you go to share your screen, there's this little itty bitty box at the bottom before you start the share that says enable computer sound for video. If you don't check that box and you go to play a video that has audio in it, guess who's hearing the audio? Only you, the presenter, is hearing the audio, right? Because it's the video playing on your computer. So those are things, again, you have to know your platform and the tools that you're designing for, because you have to select that in order for everybody in the session to hear the audio that's playing. And then lastly, speaking about audio, let's a little bit about audio. I find the number one thing I'm troubleshooting in virtual delivery, the number one thing is audio. So again, when you are setting up the logistics, a lot of these platforms on the back end, you can decide if they're using computer, if they're using dial-in, if they're using a combination. It's really important to understand what's going to be the best for your platform, for your organization. So again, I was working with a lot of government last year, even though a lot of people were at home. People, starting to get back into the office. People are working maybe in skiffs. They're a little buttoned down, and maybe they can't use the voice over IP or the computer audio. They have to dial in. So you really want to test these out, and then you want to tell the participants what's going to be the best way for them, and then of course have a backup plan. So those are some technical considerations. And lastly with that is have some clear technical guidelines for everyone involved. Here, clear technical guidelines for your facilitator, for your participants, for everyone involved. I'm going to be providing this as well in the handout, but I'm a huge believer of checklists. This keeps everybody prepared and honest, and really checklists in these 4 areas of technology, content, presenter, and participants. So from a technology perspective, we already talked a little bit about this as far as what are you going to do in the pre-session, creating the session, sending invitations, sending materials. In the session, being able to manage the technology and advancing the slides and running polls and such. From a presenter perspective, really understanding the learner's needs, being able to determine ground rules, really understanding the platform itself, having the proper hardware, and having plan Bs. From a participant perspective, making sure that they're set up with their technology. If there were materials that they needed to have, that they have the materials. If they don't have the materials, are you prepared to push the materials to them in the session themselves? Developing any visual aids, really preparing the participants so they are ready to engage as soon as they come on and not be worried about troubleshooting. The technology should fade away and they should just be able to focus on the content itself, right? So layered across all of this are plan Bs. If it can go horribly wrong, it will. And you'll always want to have plan Bs. Again, I'm going to provide this in the handouts for you, some examples of plan Bs across these 4 areas. So if it can happen, I have experienced it. So I have plan Bs usually for everything, from having alternate activities ready. So if a video isn't going to play and it's crucial to my training, what am I going to do instead? Do they have another way to watch the video? Can I punt and do some other activities? Almost always I'm logged in on a second PC, backup headset. So you want to have plan Bs and be prepared for anything with those preparation checklists. Okay, so the last little bit that we have here is delivery. So delivering online is much different than delivering face-to-face. So having a well-prepared, well-supported presenter is going to allow them to focus on delivery and effectively engage with learners, right? So in the same vein, also having well supported learners can help them focus on the content and the technology. So a lot of times when I'm doing facilitation courses for online delivery, I'll often say, you need to think of yourself as the pilot and the flight attendant when you are delivering online. You're in control of everything, right? From the technology and the behind the scenes and making sure you get where you need to go with the learning, as well as making sure everybody's having a really wonderful time, right? So you're the pilot and the flight attendant. Hello and welcome. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to manage for these facilitators behind the scenes. If you've not facilitated online and you're designing for online delivery, go and be a fly on the wall and see everything that's going on behind the scenes. And here's an example. So for a facilitator, maybe they just need to focus on showing their slides, presenting, maybe a little bit of setup, and provide instructions and facilitate. But can they do all of these other things that are required behind the scenes? Audio checks, monitoring chat, organizing breakouts, turning off participant rights, sending out files, muting people, saving files, opening and closing polls. I mean, there is just a lot going on that behind the scenes, things that you did not have to do in a face to face. One of the things I love to advocate for is having a producer for your facilitator. A producer can help a presenter stay on time and on message, right? The presenter can focus on presenting and engaging, and the producer can work behind the scenes. They can support the participants and they can support the presenter, and they can be the ones that are worried about. Uh, Monitoring chat and opening polls and putting people into breakout rooms and troubleshooting audio, and the presenter can just keep on going. And when I'm producing, I always tell my presenters, my job is to make you look like a rock star, and if all goes well, you're hardly going to even know I'm there, right? So we talked about the needs of the facilitator during delivery, but I just want to close out and talk a little bit more about participants. One best practice is making sure that they understand what is expected of them and how to use the tools. So I often start off my presentations with some sort of housekeeping slides. And these are simple reminders of things like staying muted, how to raise their hand, how to use the tools. And if you know you're going to use the same platform, you might just have someone on the team build like one or two slides that you can show for all of your sessions. And here's a quick example. These are ones I use for Zoom. This first slide here is this was for facilitation skills, letting them know that we're going to start shortly. Please mute, how to open up their chat. The next slide, when I kicked things off, I just wanted them to know to have their participant panel open, their chat, how to raise their hand. So these are a couple of examples of housekeeping slides. The other thing I'm a huge advocate for are participant guides. I know, we're on virtual and we think everything should be virtual, but if you're going to have an activity where and you saw this activity earlier when I talked about breakout activities, this is what was showing on the screen. There's a lot of storming and norming that happens in virtual breakout rooms, and it's because there's so much going on, not just for the facilitator, but for the participants. They can very easily get into their breakouts and go, what were we supposed to do? And if you're in a platform, let's say like Zoom, where it's not persistent and I can't put anything into the breakout. Once I put I can put the participants into the breakout rooms, that's it. But once they're there, the onus is on them to open a whiteboard, to, use their annotation tools to take notes, and there's no instructions, right? So if they miss something, this is why I like participant guides, and this would be something I would send to them beforehand and ask them to either have open on their machine, uh, if they have dual monitors maybe, or print out and have. And this is the example participant guide that went with that activity that I showed you earlier. So it's really more of a worksheet. They know what they need to be doing when they're in the room, and there's a little less storming and norming. So as we close out, And you get that question, can't we just, hopefully from the session today, you will be in agreement that you can't just. There is actually a lot more involved. And you need to consider the three T's of technology, timing, and talent. Remember, you are now the architect of an experience, and it's not just about one course. Think about the design, the logistics, and the delivery. And plan, practice, know your tools, test everything, have a backup plan. This is my mantra for you. So thank you so much for watching this. I appreciate you joining. There's some contact information for you on the screen. If you have a QR code reader, you can quickly zap that if you like. That'll take you to my LinkedIn page. Please link in with me. Please reach out to me. I have a lot of resources. I am always willing to share those resources. I'm always willing to get on the phone. Hopefully you can tell. I'm very passionate about virtual instructor delivery and would love to hear from you. So thank you for joining.